Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And, this time we're going back to Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, excellent.
But we're going a little deeper, right?
Right.
We want to uncover, what's the historical context and the origins of this character, the Count himself.
Right.
And the cool thing about this is that we actually have not only excerpts from the novel itself, but letters and diary entries.
Oh, wow.
From people who are in Dracula's web.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so talk about getting inside their heads.
Yeah, you really get to see the story unfold from different perspectives and really glean these insights that you wouldn't get from just reading the book.
For sure, for sure. And this also, I think, really paints a picture of what life was like back in the late 19th century.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so crucial for understanding the anxieties and beliefs that really shaped this whole masterpiece.
Yeah, so let's set the stage here. The story kicks off with young Jonathan Harker, who is a solicitor's clerk.
Okay.
And he's journeying to Transylvania to meet Count Dracula for a real estate deal. But even the journey itself is steeped in symbolism, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Jonathan's leaving this familiar world of England that's meticulously mapped, and he's venturing into the shadowy, almost mythical land of Transylvania. And Stoker really emphasizes this contrast. Jonathan remarks on the lack of detailed maps compared to the British Ordnance Survey maps.
Right, and he even describes the Carpathian Mountains as this place where every known superstition in the world is gathered.
Right.
Talk about setting a tone.
Oh, yeah. And it's not just the lack of maps. He encounters these old-fashioned hotels, people in traditional clothing, ancient ruins. It's like he's stepping back in time. And, for a Victorian reader, that sense of otherness would have been really unsettling.
And Stoker does not let us forget about this feeling of unease. Little details build this tension.
Yeah.
The landlady's fearful reaction when Dracula's name is even mentioned, her insistence that Jonathan takes a crucifix for protection.
Oh, wow.
Even the locals refusing to talk about the Count's castle.
Right. It's these little details that are so important because they create this sense of foreboding, that there's this darkness that awaits Jonathan and by extension, us as the reader.
And then we finally meet the infamous Count Dracula.
Yeah.
And he's introduced as a nobleman, a boyar.
A boyar.
And I'll be honest, I had to look that up because I didn't know what that was, but it turns out they were like the upper crust of the nobility in that region.
Right, and that detail is so crucial because it adds a layer of complexity to his character. He's not just some shady figure in a castle. He's a product of this specific historical and social context.
Yeah.
And understanding that helps us unpack what he wants and what his desires are.
Yeah, and then he goes on this whole monologue about his ancestors.
Yeah.
And boasting about all their victories in battle and their resistance against invaders.
And that's where Stoker starts weaving in those historical echoes. Dracula speaks of the Battle of Kosovo, pivotal event in Serbian and Ottoman history. And maybe most intriguingly, Vlad the Impaler.
Vlad the Impaler.
Wallachian.
Do you think that's where Stoker got the inspiration for the name Dracula?
I mean, it's a strong possibility. The name itself can mean son of the dragon or son of the devil, but it also connects to Vlad's father, who was a member of the Order of the Dragon. So Stoker was likely aware of these historical figures and their reputations, and he uses them to add this layer of realism, this unreal realism to Dracula.
Yeah, so we're seeing here that Dracula isn't just a creature of the night, but he's deeply rooted in this history.
Yeah.
That, for Stoker's audience wouldn't have been that abstract.
Exactly. And it's not just Vlad. Think about the other groups that he mentions, Wallachians, Saxons, Magyars, Turks. These weren't just names on a page. These represented centuries of tension and conflict in that region.
Yeah, and it's amazing how Stoker blends these threads into his narrative.
It really is.
Speaking of threads, the story shifts to Mina Murray's perspective, and it's such a stark contrast.
Oh, yeah.
We go from Jonathan, who's trapped in this Gothic castle, to Mina, his fiancée, who's, bubbling with excitement about their upcoming wedding.
Right, but that initial joy is quickly overshadowed by this growing unease. And her diary entries start to reflect that. We get these ominous weather descriptions. And then we're introduced to Mr. Swales, this old sailor who has this thing for morbid pronouncements.
Mr. Swales, his obsession with tombstones and the unreliability of history just creeped me out.
Really?
Yeah, it's like he's suggesting that even the dead can't escape these narratives and these stories that may or may not even be true.
That's a really good observation.
Yeah.
And his pronouncements tap into this deeper anxiety about truth and memory. Who do we trust? Whose version of events do we believe? And these questions become increasingly difficult to answer as the story unfolds.
Yeah, and then adding to this unsettling atmosphere, we have the arrival of this derelict ship, the Demeter in Whitby.
And the circumstances surrounding that arrival are just bone-chilling. The ship's steered by a dead man tied to the wheel with a crucifix in his hand. A huge dog leaps from the boat and disappears. And the captain's final log entries hint at this terrifying presence on board.
And the log entries themselves are mini horror stories.
Yeah.
Talking about a dwindling crew, these superstitious fears, and this creeping sense of dread that something unnatural is happening.
It's masterful how Stoker uses these entries to build suspense. We're getting this fragmented glimpse into this horror that unfolded on the ship, and it's all the more effective because it is so fragmented.
Yeah. And reading Mina's increasingly anxious diary entries alongside these accounts of the Demeter, it's like Stoker is subtly weaving together these seemingly disparate threads.
Exactly. Suddenly her anxieties, her strange dreams, her encounters with these unsettling characters, they start to feel connected to whatever evil arrived on that ship. It's like Dracula's shadow is starting to spread even before he physically arrives in England.
Yeah, and those recurring symbols, the crucifix, the imagery of blood and the color red, even the unsettling descriptions of Dracula's appearance, they all contribute to this growing sense of dread.
It's like a puzzle being slowly assembled, and each piece is adding to this overall picture of horror. And just when you think you're starting to grasp the situation, Stoker introduces Dr. Seward and his peculiar patient, Renfield.
Oh, Renfield.
Yes.
His obsession with consuming life, his talk about a master.
Yeah.
They add a whole other layer of unsettling foreshadowing.
Right. It's like Renfield is a distorted mirror reflecting Dracula's own predatory nature.
Yeah.
And his pronouncements become even creepier when you realize they're hinting at Dracula's growing influence.
Yeah, and that's where we'll pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But we've only just begun to scratch the surface of the story's complexity.
Definitely.
I'm already hooked.
Me too. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve deeper into those thematic connections and the anxieties that Stoker so brilliantly weaves into his narrative.
Stay tuned.
Can't wait.
Okay, so we left off with Dracula's shadow kind of looming large even before he sets foot in England.
Right.
The story shifting back and forth between Jonathan, still trapped in the castle, and Mina back in Whitby, and she's getting more and more uneasy.
And it's amazing how Stoker mirrors those experiences. They're both grappling with this sense of powerlessness. Jonathan's physically confined his attempts to escape or to communicate with anybody outside the castle, or just thwarted at every turn.
Yeah.
And Mina, despite being surrounded by friends and loved ones, she's haunted by these strange dreams and encounters and this growing sense of dread that she just can't really articulate.
It's like the more Jonathan learns about Dracula's true nature, the more unnerved Mina becomes, even though they're miles apart.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, what Jonathan discovers is terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's practically a prisoner watching Dracula scale the castle walls like some monstrous lizard, witnessing the three horrifying women and realizing that the Count is obsessed with England and has plans to travel there.
Yeah, and those details are so carefully chosen by Stoker, Dracula moving like a creature of the night. Right. The three women representing temptation and this kind of unholy trinity, it all just adds to his otherworldly and predatory nature.
Speaking of predatory, remember that parallel we drew between Dracula and Jonathan, both outsiders in a way?
Yeah.
Well, it gets even more interesting as the story unfolds.
Yeah.
Jonathan's trying to understand this foreign land and its customs, even as he's totally repulsed by what he sees.
Yeah.
Dracula, however, isn't interested in understanding.
Right.
He wants to conquer and control not just England, but individuals.
Individuals. Yeah, that's such a clever contrast.
Yeah.
Both characters are trying to navigate these unfamiliar landscapes, but their approaches are just fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And that difference speaks to this core anxiety of the Victorian era.
Yeah.
This fear of the other, the unknown, the outsider, who might disrupt the established order.
Yeah. Which brings us to Lucy Weston, Mina's dear friend.
Oh, Lucy.
Who starts experiencing these strange, almost vampiric symptoms.
Right.
Sleepwalking weakness, these unexplainable marks on her neck.
Yeah, as a modern reader, it's pretty obvious what's happening. But imagine encountering this back in the 1890s. It would have been utterly baffling and terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
Stoker was a master at blending this psychological realism with supernatural horror.
Yeah.
And Lucy's decline is described in such vivid detail. Her paleness, the exhaustion, the puncture marks on her throat. It creates this chilling sense of realism.
Yeah, and it plays on those Victorian anxieties that you mentioned. The fear of disease, the fascination with the occult, and especially the anxieties around female sexuality and vulnerability.
Absolutely. Lucy is portrayed as this innocent, beautiful young woman, and yet she becomes the target of this predatory force that is slowly draining her life away.
Right.
And it's this potent image that speaks to those deeper societal fears.
Meanwhile, Jonathan, still trapped in Transylvania, is trying desperately to escape and warn everyone about Dracula.
Correct.
And it's heartbreaking, he tries to get letters out. He even appeals to the Romani people traveling through the area.
Yeah.
But Dracula's influence is so strong that even they refuse to help Jonathan after the Count intervenes.
Right. It really emphasizes just how isolated and powerless he is.
Yeah, and that isolation is amplified by the setting of Dracula's castle.
Of course.
These crumbling walls, the dark corridors, the lack of mirrors, it all contributes to this sense of being trapped in a nightmare where, the rules of reality no longer apply.
It's like the castle itself is a reflection of Dracula's warped and distorted world.
Yeah, this brings us back to Mina.
Yeah.
Her anxieties are mirroring these Gothic elements, even though she's so far away.
Right.
She starts experiencing disturbing dreams, and then there's that chilling scene where she finds Lucy sleepwalking in the churchyard.
In the churchyard.
With her throat exposed and this large bird perched nearby.
Oh, that scene is pure Gothic brilliance.
Yeah.
It's visually unsettling with that image of the bird, often associated with vampires and folklore, adding to that symbolic dread.
Right.
And it plays on that theme of vulnerability. Lucy's completely at the mercy of forces that she doesn't understand.
It's like a visual representation of these unseen forces that are closing in on her.
Yeah, and no one, not even Mina, seems to fully grasp the danger.
Right.
And that's what makes the story so effective.
What?
These characters are grappling with the unexplainable, trying to make sense of events that just defy their understanding.
Yeah, but amidst all of this, Stoker introduces another layer of complexity with Dr. Seward's patient Renfield.
Renfield.
Yeah, his bizarre behavior,
Uh-huh.
his obsession with consuming life, his cryptic pronouncements about a master.
Yeah, it takes on a whole new meaning once we realize his connection to Dracula.
Right.
It's not just madness, his zoophagous diet.
Yeah.
His fascination with spiders and flies becomes this twisted echo of Dracula's own predatory nature.
Yeah, it's like he's this human barometer reflecting Dracula's growing power and influence. And speaking of influence, Dracula finally arrives in England.
He does.
The characters begin to piece together clues from newspaper reports, diary entries, and their own unsettling experiences.
And it's this gradual unfolding of horror, this slow realization of the true nature of the threat they face that makes it so terrifying.
Yeah, the tension just keeps ratcheting up.
It does.
And then we learn about Lucy's heart condition,
Right.
making her even more vulnerable to Dracula.
It adds another layer to Stoker's exploration of female fragility and the anxieties surrounding illness and mortality in Victorian society.
Absolutely. Lucy, despite her youth and vitality, is ultimately at the mercy of forces beyond her control.
Right, and it's heartbreaking, really, to see her slipping away despite the love and care of everyone around her.
It becomes a race against time.
It does.
Jonathan's trapped, Lucy's fading, and Dracula is loose in England, growing stronger with each passing day.
And the characters are forced to confront their own limitations, to question their beliefs, and ultimately to fight for their survival.
Talk about a cliffhanger.
I know.
And that's where we'll leave things for now. But don't worry, we'll be back to tackle the final act of this story and unpack its deeper meanings.
We'll see how the characters confront this ultimate evil, and perhaps more importantly, what lessons they learn along the way.
Stay tuned. All right, so we're back, and the stakes are high. Jonathan's still trapped in Transylvania, Lucy's health is declining rapidly, and Dracula is loose in England, preying on the innocent.
It's a dire situation, to say the least. But it's in this moment of crisis that Dr. Seward decides to turn to his former mentor.
Oh, yeah.
The enigmatic Professor Van Helsing.
Yeah, and Helsing, he is such a compelling character.
He is.
This brilliant doctor and scientist.
Right.
But he's also steeped in folklore and occult knowledge.
Right.
It's like he embodies that clash between the rational and the irrational that really defined that late Victorian era.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The late 19th century was this time of incredible scientific advancement, but there was also this fascination with the unexplained, with the mysteries that science just couldn't fully account for.
And Helsing kind of bridges that gap.
He does.
He uses his scientific knowledge to understand Dracula, but he also recognizes the power of these ancient traditions and beliefs.
Exactly.
He doesn't dismiss things like crucifixes or garlic as just superstition.
Right?
He sees them as tools to be used in this battle against evil.
Yeah, he understands that this is a fight that requires both knowledge and faith. It's not just about understanding the science behind vampirism, but also confronting the spiritual and the psychological dimensions of this threat.
And it's not just Van Helsing fighting Dracula.
Yeah.
He rallies this whole group, Jonathan Mina, Dr. Seward Lord Godalming,
Right.
and they become this united front against the Count.
Yeah, they share information, they support each other, they literally put their lives on the line for this common cause.
And that sense of community is so crucial.
It is. They realize they can't defeat Dracula alone.
Yeah.
You know, it requires this collective action, this shared purpose, and a willingness to believe in something beyond themselves.
Sadly, though, despite their best efforts, they can't save Lucy.
Right.
Her death is just one of the most heartbreaking moments in the novel.
It's a real turning point in the story.
Yeah.
You know, Lucy's death just shatters their sense of security, and it forces them to confront the reality of Dracula's power and the true horror of what they're facing.
And her transformation into a vampire.
Oh.
It's especially disturbing.
It is. It really underscores that corrupting influence of Dracula and how he can twist even the purest souls into something monstrous.
Yeah, it plays on that theme of duality that we see throughout the novel. You know, Lucy, this symbol of innocence and beauty, becomes this creature of darkness and predation.
Right. It's this stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that darkness can lurk beneath even the most virtuous facade.
Even in death, though,
Yeah.
Lucy becomes a source of strength.
She does.
Her spirit helps guide the others.
Right.
And her fate strengthens their resolve to destroy Dracula once and for all.
That idea of redemption through sacrifice is so powerful. These characters were willing to risk everything to make that ultimate sacrifice, to vanquish this evil and protect humanity.
And then we get that epic chase.
We do.
Jonathan and Van Helsing pursuing Dracula back to his castle in Transylvania.
Yeah, it's a thrilling climax to the story.
It's this brilliant blend of gothic horror and adventure, you know?
Right.
The characters use all their resources, their knowledge, their courage to track down and confront Dracula in his lair.
It's not just a physical chase, though, is it?
No, it's not.
It's a battle of wits. You know, the clash between good and evil, between the forces of light and darkness.
In that final confrontation in Dracula's castle,
Yeah.
it's so symbolic.
It is. It's a return to the source of the horror, a reckoning with the very heart of darkness.
The way Dracula is defeated, it's so brutal and cathartic.
The stake through the heart, the decapitation, it's a decisive act that symbolizes the triumph of good over evil.
But even in victory, there's this source of ambiguity.
Right.
The characters are forever marked by their encounter with Dracula.
Of course.
Their innocence is lost.
Right, their world's irrevocably changed.
That's what makes Dracula such an enduring story.
It really is.
It's not a simple tale of heroes and villains.
No, it's
It's this exploration of fear and desire.
Right.
And the clash between tradition and modernity, and that enduring power of human connection, even when faced with this overwhelming darkness.
Yeah, well said.
So after this deep dive, what are your final thoughts? What can we take away from exploring Dracula?
I think Stoker's novel reminds us that evil can take many forms, and sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that we create within ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, the fear of the other, the anxieties about change and the unknown, those are all things that still resonate with us today.
And it also reminds us that even in the darkest times, there's hope.
There is.
And collective action, love, courage can triumph over even the most formidable evil.
Beautifully said, and I think that's a fitting note to end on.
It is.
Dracula is a story that stays with you long after you finish reading it. It challenges you. It provokes you. And ultimately, it leaves you with a sense of hope, even in the midst of all that darkness.
Well, dear listener, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into Dracula. We've explored the historical context, the literary influences, and the deeper themes that make this story so compelling. And remember to check out the show notes for further reading suggestions if you want to delve even deeper into this world of vampires, Victorian anxieties, and the enduring power of Gothic literature. Until next time, happy reading.